Welcome back to your Sprinkle with Hope podcast. And your host, Jason. And today, Shane and I are so excited to welcome our guest, Amanda Louder. I've been following her for a long time, and she has a great message. And it all involves just our sexuality, sex with our spouse or our partner, and just what that should look like and feel like. She gives some great advice. If you want additional, go and check her podcast out. But enjoy this episode.
She keeps going back to talking about getting yourself right, and I really appreciated that's the thing that stuck in my mind as we talked to her, that you need, in anything, you need to make sure that you're getting yourself right first. Love this discussion. Hope you listen in.
Welcome to the Sprinkled with Hope podcast.
Welcome back to your Sprinkle with Hope podcast and your host, Jason. And we are so excited to welcome our guest, Amanda Louder, with us today. I followed Amanda for, I don't even know how many years now, but she's amazing. And I'm just so excited and thrilled to be able to talk to her about a subject that some of you might feel is like, why are you talking about this on a Hope podcast? And we'll get to that. But for those that don't know Amanda, I'm going to introduce her a little bit. For many years, she really hated sex. It just was not a good thing for her. But she grew up in a home where they didn't talk about it. As a teen, I felt a lot of shame about my sexual thoughts and feelings. And when I got married, sex was not what I thought it would be. For years, I had sex out of obligation. I did it just to fulfill his needs and get him off my back for a while. And we'll talk about that a little bit, I'm sure. It wasn't pleasurable, and I felt used, broken, and ashamed. And honestly, I would have been fine if we never had sex again, which is a sad thought to think about. But after 12 years of marriage, I decided something needed to change. I began educating myself, facing my sexual shame head on, and things started to shift. I started to see myself and sex in a new way. Sex became something that could bless my life and my marriage instead of hinder it. I've been studying sex and sexuality for the last 12 years. I now love sex, which is awesome. And I can help you change the way you feel about it too. So, Amanda, maybe just the first question I have is this kind of something that you see often occurring, is that one or the other partner feels this same way, that sex is just something that they do out of obligation as opposed to really enjoying it?
Yes, a lot. Yeah, that's pretty much what my entire practice is about as a sex coach, is helping mostly women who just never feel like they're in the mood, have no desire, have a lot of anxiety or resentment about sex, just doing it out of obligation because their husband, quote unquote, needs it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just not good for them. And so I really help them figure out how to make it amazing for them so that they can enjoy it just as much, if not more, than their spouse.
Right.
And really, bless their life and their relationship with it.
So I think with a lot of things, we tend to look outside of ourselves, right? And we think something might be wrong with the other person. You talk a lot about that you changed the way that you saw it, and you noticed some things that were wrong with you, and you've changed those things. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that and what you discovered and what maybe our listeners could learn.
Yeah. So based on the way that I grew up in a very conservative religious home where we didn't really talk about sex. And so a lot of the ideas and belief systems that I had about sex came from what was taught to me explicitly, but also implicitly. Mm. And I think, we have to look at what we've been taught and what we've taken away from our family and growing up, because we all have cultures within our family. We have cultures around, our religion, and we learn things explicitly and implicitly from that as well. And then just from the culture at large. And so really taking a look at my belief systems and what I believed about myself and my sexuality, what I believed about sex in marriage, like all had to shift, because I was thinking like, I was bad and wrong for having these sexual thoughts and feelings as a teenager. And even though when I got married, I knew that it was okay, technically, right? It was hard to make that switch. And also okay, well, sex is okay, but it's really for him. It's not for me. I shouldn't enjoy it too much. There's a limit to what should be happening here. There are guidelines and rules about what should happen in the marriage bed. I had all of these ideas and they were all wrong. And so learning to shift that, and you can't just go from I hate sex to I love sex overnight.
Right.
It is a process, and it took me a long time to get the whole shift down, but because it took me so long to do it, now I can help women and couples work through that process in a lot shorter amount of time, kind of give them the fast track to starting to identify and change those belief systems.
Yeah. And that's great. I really love that we're talking about this, because I think that it needs to be discussed more, not less. Right. And we've got marriages that, have been in some struggles and things like that. And so what are maybe one or two of the hints or tips that you have that you could share with us that maybe, that thought process or that place that you were in and changing yourself to where you thought, okay, I can actually enjoy this. This can be something that the both of us can enjoy together, as opposed to him just being like, yeah, he's doing his thing and I'm just going to lay here. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We call that starfish sex, where you just, lay there.
Yeah.
He does his thing. So, it really was about me getting educated. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
We don't have a comprehensive sexual education in the United States. It's basically based on reproduction and preventing pregnancy and STIs, which is not a comprehensive education.
No, it's not.
So really educating myself about my body and how my body worked was a huge part of it. Because of that sexual shame and ideas that I had believed growing up, I didn't think it was okay for me to touch my own body, which is ridiculous. It's my body. Who better to touch it, right? And so I had to figure that out. What actually felt good for me? What, I didn't even know that I had a clitoris. Which is the organ for women whose sole job is pleasure.
Yeah.
If it's the whole job, why are we not talking about it more? That is never brought up in sexual education, and wasn't brought up in my home either. So I had no idea that I even had one. So how was I know what was supposed to work? So once I finally figured out how my body worked and stuff, and sex actually became more pleasurable, I was like, oh, okay, well, now I need to start working on some these other things, because I actually am enjoying it now. It's actually good. So then I had to start working through the shame processes of sex is bad, and sex is just for men. That was a huge thing. Oh, wait, it can be for me. It can, women actually have a higher capacity for sexuality than men do. Fun fact. And yet we've been so cultured to believe that men are the sexual ones, and women, sexuality is powerful for both men and women. And unfortunately, patriarchy has tried to really squash that. And that's not men in general. That's just the system of patriarchy, but really squash that so that women are looking at themselves through a lens that is focused on men's sexuality. So thinking I should just desire sex like he does. I should orgasm in 5 to 8 minutes like he does. All of these are not even correct for a woman. And so we have to start to shift those, education is a huge piece, shift those things. I had to, heal my relationship with my body, because I felt for so long that my body was somehow wrong or broken because it wasn't working like a man's. So all of these things had to shift, and that's exactly what I work with women on as well.
That's
in my program.
We really appreciate people who go through life and change for the better, and then start helping as many people as they can. We really appreciate that in you, and really all of our guests that we talk to. So I'm curious if you find maybe one thing that holds people back as you're talking to them and working with them. Is there one thing that you find that is that roadblock to where you're at?
Yeah. called shame.
Mm.
Shame is a huge piece that we have to work through a lot. And it's hard to work through because there's so many layers to it, And so once we can kind of work through a lot of that shame, then things start to open up a lot.
Mm.
And a lot of people don't even realize that they have sexual shame. They think, oh, I'm just private.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that's the sexual shame rearing its ugly head. So like that. And so a lot of people don't even identify that they have shame, but that's what it is.
Mm. That's so good. I think that we do have a lot of that shame going on, and unfortunately it does happen. So what, like you said, women can actually enjoy sex better than men most of the time. And so why is it that there's like this disconnect? What do you, other than shame, what is it that women are afraid to do that men aren't, or whatever, vice versa?
Well, I mean, men tend to have a little bit better relationship with their body and understand how their body works. And so, I mean, men might have some shame going into it too, but most of the time they can work through it pretty quick once they're in a sexual relationship. They're like, oh, wait, this is really good. So I just want to keep on doing it and I don't care.
Yeah.
Whereas women are like, oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know about this. Like, I know it's supposed to be good, but I haven't figured it out yet. And I can't touch my body and I don't know my body. And like, it's all framed. Like a lot of how it was framed was, and I know that you had Jennifer Finlayson Fife on your podcast previously, and she talks a lot about this, where like women are, cultured to be desirable and men are cultured to desire. And so like that has not even been a part, like desiring and thinking about what we want hasn't even been part of our life for most women. Like we kind of get to like, okay, I'm going to graduate high school and, I'll go to college and I'll get married and I'll have some kids. And there's nothing beyond that. So we haven't really been taught to desire in general, let alone like, what do I want sexually for myself?
Yeah. Really love this discussion. I agree with both of you. We need to talk about this more. And I think you're an expert more than us. We're on the other side of this as males, but I think we can all learn regardless of who we are and improve those relationships.
Well, and men can, I mean, not only understand themselves, but they can work to understand their spouse to make it good for her, even if she doesn't feel like she's worthy of that, which is a lot of it, right? So, and, I mean, she can shut it down for sure. But like the more educated men get about women and their body, the better, because then you're like, no, it's only been 10 minutes. You shouldn't have orgasmed yet. Let's just keep going. Yeah. And, let me put off, delay my orgasm to make sure you have your orgasm first. Right. And doing stuff like that, really putting her first and her sexuality first really strengthens the sexual relationship.
Which is awesome. I was going to ask that question, but you answered how can we, what are things we can do, but you answered that perfectly. So
yeah, there's some books that I recommend to every couple, men and women. So the book, She Comes First by Ian Kerner. It's a thinking man's guide to pleasuring a woman. So it's good for women to read too, but it goes through like, there are 18 parts of the clitoris. Like there's a whole arousal network, and it's really important to stimulate all of it. And so that really helps a woman build that arousal so she actually can orgasm. So like, that's a really a good book. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski is a fantastic one that really talks about how women's desire tends to be more responsive. Like we just tend to think like desire should just be there. And and for a lot of men, it is, not all men, but for a lot of men, it is. For most women, it's more responsive. It depends on the context of what's happening. So desire usually shows up after arousal. For women. So if women are like just waiting around for that desire to be there before they want to have sex, it's probably not going to happen. That's why so many women are like, I'm just not in the mood. Well, of course you're not, because that's not how your body works. So thinking about like, what is the context that I can create for myself or my spouse that is going to help drive that arousal and that desire to come out? Like if she's had a hard day with the kids and been run around, like, and there's so much on her mind, like, of course she's not thinking about sex. There's just too much there. But when you can create the context around that, and she worked to create it herself, then that can help things tremendously.
Yeah, because I can just picture it. You know, my wife always talks about having 50 tabs open, you know,
Yes.
all day long, right? And so
Yes.
by the end of the day, she's like, okay, I might have closed one,
Mhm.
but I still got 49 tabs open, and I'm still thinking about all that stuff. And where I'm like, all right, let's have some fun and let's enjoy and be intimate together. And she's like, yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. So women really need to take that time. And I think this is a great thing. Like men can help their wives
Yes.
create space for that desire and that arousal to come out. So, you know, like if husbands are like, okay, you go take a bath or you go for a walk, or like whatever it is that helps her connect back to herself rather than being the caretaker for everything else. And you're like, I'll take care of the kids, I'll get them to bed, you go spend some time by yourself, then she's going to reconnect to herself as a woman and not just as a caretaker. And like the last thing a woman wants to do is caretake her husband.
Right.
Right. Like, and so, I mean, it's no wonder when you're having sex out of duty and obligation, you're caretaking him, which is not sexy. And it also, like, biologically speaking, we're not supposed to be attracted to people we take care of. So if you're having to take care of your husband, then of course you're not in the mood. Like, of course so we really have to get out of that mommy mode and back connect to ourselves so that we can move into sexy wife.
Yeah.
I love that. And I'm going to ask you a question I asked Jennifer Finlayson Fife on our episode as well. And what would you say is the difference between intimacy and sex? And is there a difference?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Sex is just an act, right? It's and I talk about it, like I talk about opening up your definition of sex. Like sex is not just intercourse. It's two people connecting. There's pleasure, you know, all that kind of stuff. But there's lots of ways to have sex, not just intercourse. But intimacy is really about knowing someone inside and out and being fully known. And you can have sex and not do that for sure. But really, like, understanding your partner, understanding yourself. And some people are like, okay, well, I can understand you to a point, but I definitely don't want to understand me. Like we're limiting our intimacy because we're so afraid of that vulnerability and that rejection, and afraid that, you know, if our partner really knew us, they would reject us. Or like, I don't really want to know you because there's probably parts of you that I'm not going to like either.
Yeah, love that advice. That's so good. Connecting with our partner and ourselves.
It's sex is so much about yourself.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with women, I spend the majority of the time working on their relationship with themselves. Then we talk about their relationship with their spouse, and then we move into sex, because great sex comes from a really healthy, good relationship with yourself and a healthy relationship with your spouse. So when you can love yourself, all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, love your spouse, the good, the bad, the ugly, holy cow, the sex can be amazing because you're not limiting it. You're being fully intimate and known. And it's so, so good.
And I love that you start with yourself. We start with inside of us, and I just love that.
Yes.
I might have missed this, but maybe I did. But you talked a little bit about books. Have you written a book? And if not, is there a book in the stars?
I have not written a book. My work is really with the podcast and then my coaching program. I've always said I'm not a writer, but I've actually doing a podcast for 4.5 years. I've kind of become a writer. So, I mean, it's kind of in the back of my mind, you know, somewhere down the road, maybe, but I love to just put value out into the world. And I feel like I do that with my podcast. I mean, 228 episodes as of today. That's a lot of, and it's the embodiment of a lot of my work. But then when you come into my coaching program, like people think, oh, I've listened to her podcast. Like, I don't need her coaching program. Oh, you do. Like there is so much more. Like I'm just giving you little tastes on the
Right.
podcast of what's available. And in the coaching program, we have, I mean, we just go really deep and personal and apply everything that you're learning specifically to your situation. And it's just like it'll maximize what you're doing from listening from the podcast like 100-fold. It's amazing.
I love it. And I've loved listening to your episodes. They're really insightful.
Thank you.
So one of the questions that I had was, you've been studying this for about 12 years. What was it that actually got you into being a coach and things like that? Was it the negative relationship that you had with sex, or what was it that actually got you involved?
I did not start out as a sex coach.
Oh, okay.
So that when I hated sex, that was in my first marriage. And I really worked on things to improve that part of our relationship. I thought, like, if the sex can get better, maybe our marriage will get better. And the sex definitely got better, but the marriage was still really bad. It was emotionally abusive and so much more. So I ended up actually ending that marriage. And then I married my husband, Kevin, who we've been married for 10 years now. And so I initially I thought about going back to school to become a therapist,
Okay.
to help women who were struggling in their marriage and contemplating divorce, going through a lot of the same things that I had gone through in my first marriage. And so when I found coaching, I was like, ooh, that's what I want to do. Because therapy, like it would have been like 8 years full time to get where I wanted to
Right.
go. And with 5 little kids, like there was just no way. And so when I found coaching, I was like, this is actually what I would rather do, because I don't really want to work with like the mentally ill or anything like that. I just want to make like people who already have a pretty good life, make it amazing. And that's really what coaching is about. And so I started out coaching women who were struggling in their marriage and contemplating divorce. I'd been coaching for a little over a year. And I went on a girls' trip with a bunch of other coaches. And by the end of the weekend, they were like, Amanda, you have got to change your niche to sex, because we have learned more from you in a weekend than we have in 15 to 20 years of marriage. And I was really scared at first, like, oh, talking about this so openly. And so I was like,
Right.
oh, I don't know. But I came home and I talked to my husband about it. And he's like, well, I guess if you're not sharing anything like about like what happens for us in the bedroom, then
Right.
okay. And so I decided to go all in, and it's been amazing. And my business just completely exploded. So I know it's so, so needed. And I truly feel like it is my passion and my calling in this life.
Love it. Love, love, love what you're saying. So we get asked quite a bit from our followers how they can connect with our guests. So how do they find you, and where do they find you?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Sex for Saints. And it's available on all the podcast apps. You can find me the most on Instagram, but I'm on Facebook too at Amanda Louder Coaching. And then my website is just amandalouder.com. And I have on there all about coaching with me. I do retreats. I've got a couples retreat coming up in October, and then a women's retreat in February. The retreats are absolutely amazing. This will be my first couples retreat, so I'm really excited to see what happens with it. I've been doing women's retreats for a few years now. And so one of my guests at my last retreat, her quote from the retreat was, I came lost and I'm going home found. And it's the retreat, while of course it's about sex, it's really focused on your relationship with yourself. So we do a lot of things to really help you have a better relationship with yourself, including hair and makeup and boudoir photography for all of my guests, which is super fun. Some women are really nervous. Some women are like, oh, I don't know. And if you don't want to do it, that's totally fine. But women will go into the room and come out a completely different person, because they see
Interesting.
themselves through new eyes. And like, of course, I'm sure their husbands enjoy the pictures, but it's really not about the husbands. It's about them and seeing themselves as beautiful and sexy. I hired someone to come in and teach a chair dance routine. And like, again, like they could go home and do this routine for their husbands, but that's not what it's about. It's about them being comfortable in their own skin and moving their body and just really embracing their sexuality. And it's only women at the retreat. So we keep it really comfortable. I bring in a chef to do all of our meals. I have, like a team of hair and makeup people and photographers. And like, it just makes it a wonderful experience. I bring in some guest speakers in addition to myself. My good friend, Amy Gianni, is a marriage and family therapist, as well as a master certified coach. And she comes in and she talks about relationships. And I have a friend coming and talking about like, menstrual cycles and how that relates to our sexuality. And another friend that's a marriage coach come in and talk. So I bring in lots of other experts to come and just make the week amazing. So it's super fun.
That's awesome. This has been such a great conversation, Amanda. I wish we could go on for another half an hour, and it'd be pretty easy to do, I think.
I'm sure it would.
But near the end of our podcast, Shane and I, we do this thing that we call the double down dose. And so it's 2 questions we ask you. We ask all of our guests these same questions. But the first part of the double down dose is, what is your definition of hope?
Hope is about looking forward to the future with an optimism and joy. And I think, especially if you don't have that in your life, then it's really hard to be happy without that hope. And so, especially if this is happening in your sex life, there is hope that things can change and you can look forward to the future with joy and happiness.
Love it.
Yeah, awesome. So the second question of the double down dose is, how would you define love?
Ooh, gosh. Love is a pure acceptance of yourself and those around you. And coaching has taught me how to love myself and to love others unconditionally. And I mean, I'm still human, like, still don't do it all the time. Right. But it has completely changed the way that I love myself. So when I was married to my first husband, my mental health really suffered because of the abuse, to the point that in 2010, I almost took my life. And to see where I am now, like, and the relationship that I have with myself now, how much I choose every single day to love myself and those around me has completely changed my outlook on everything, and really just makes it so easy to love everyone, including myself, which is sometimes hard. So
it is hard.
It is hard. And so thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. We're super grateful that you didn't do that, and
me
that
too.
you're here. And just, Amanda, thank you so much for your time and talking about this. Getting more knowledge and wisdom out there in the world is much needed. So thank you, and keep doing the great work that you do.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I just want to, close on what are your thoughts? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, and I kind of brought it up when we first started this podcast, but what does hope and sex have to do with each other? Why are we talking about that on a hope podcast?
Well, I think when you're in a marriage and a relationship where the sex is not good, you're not as hopeful about the future and that relationship with your spouse. And when the sex is good, then you have that joy and that happiness and looking forward to continuing to make it great.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, for coming on our show. And it was such a pleasure to get to talk to you in person and get to know you a little bit better.
Thank you so much for having me.